This is Brandon Howard, singer, songwriter, music producer, better known by his performance name of B. Howard. Brandon is allegedly the love child from a casual hookup between his mother, singer Miki Howard, and singer Michael Jackson in the early 1980s. Brandon was born on April the 2nd, 1981. After Michael Jackson's untimely passing on June the 25th, 2009, and as Brandon continued his grind for his musical dreams, to achieve his musical dreams, and as he continued to garner more attention and publicity, people started to notice his similarities to MJ as far as his looks, as far as his voice, as far as his mannerisms. And they started to research and ask questions and delve into things. It was discovered that Brandon's mother, Miki Howard, was managed by none other than Michael's father, Joe Jackson, in the early 1980s. It was also uncovered that Miki Howard had become real close with several members of the Jackson family themselves. And over the years that passed in the early 1980s, her two sons as well had become like part of the Jackson family, so to speak, as she was, and they treated her sons, Brandon and his younger brother Nicholas, like they were Jackson kids, which is interesting. It's also interesting to note, as I said earlier, that Brandon was born on April 2nd, 1981, and we all know that Michael Jackson's hit song, Billie Jean, which there's another interesting note. It was also uncovered that allegedly Miki Howard was referred to as Billy in the early 1980s. I don't know how true that is, but it's alleged that she was referred to the name Billy in the early 1980s. So that's interesting. So as I continue, we all know that Michael Jackson has a hit song, Billie Jean, which was released on his 1982 Thriller album. And so Billie Jean, which is a song about paternity, and Michael in the song denying the kid is not his son. We all familiar with that. So interesting, to say the least. In 2014, Brandon willingly submitted to a DNA sample being taken from a swab in his mouth. Many media outlets reported that it was Brandon trying to prove that he was the biological son of Michael Jackson, so he can claim some money from the estate or something at the time. But Brandon refuted that. He said that was not true. That wasn't what he was on. That ain't what he was on. But he never gave a clear reason of why he submitted to the DNA swab. But he said that it wasn't to prove that he was the biological son of Michael Jackson and make a claim against the estate. But like I said, the reasoning for him taking the DNA swab was unclear, because he never gave a reasoning of why he took the DNA swab in the first place. Well, the lab that took the DNA sample from Brandon went on to compare that with reportedly a dental imprint from Michael Jackson from a former dentist. And they compared the samples, the DNA samples, and they had a big press conference where they announced that it was 99.9999% that Michael Jackson was the biological father of Brandon. This was in March of 2014. After that big spectacle and announcement that the DNA test allegedly proved that Michael was the biological father, a couple of days later, TMZ came out with a report that the DNA test results were bogus and the DNA lab was not a legit lab, and so on and so forth. Yeah, they came out that the DNA test and results was bogus. TMZ came out with that. And the DNA lab wasn't an actual lab. So, yeah, so here we go. It was later determined that it was not a sure match that Michael was the biological father. The results was actually inconclusive. That means that they couldn't say for sure that he was the biological father from the DNA samples, or that they couldn't discount him from being the biological father. So whatever that means. So it just makes the water more murkier, so to speak. That's what I'm gonna say. During this same time, musician Augie Johnson came out and said that he was the biological dad of Brandon. And he had a relationship with singer Miki Howard in the early 1980s, and he said that produced Brandon and his younger brother Nicholas from their relationship. So Augie Johnson says that he was the biological dad of Brandon. He said he was in the delivery room when Brandon was born, and so on and so forth, and all these other things. And Brandon looked at him as a dad and all this, and he was the biological dad. He said other things too. He said Mickey didn't even know Michael at that time, had not met him at that time. That's what musician Augie Johnson said at the time. I find it interesting that Mr. Johnson would say these things, and if he is the biological father of Brandon, why don't Brandon or his younger brother Nicholas have his last name Johnson? I don't understand that. Why do they have the last name Howard? That's just a interesting thing that I find that very interesting. What man, if that's your biological sons, wouldn't want their last name on their son, especially their sons, to carry on their legacy? I just find that kind of interesting. I don't know if you all do, but I find that interesting. I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting stepdaddy vibes from Mr. Augie Johnson. Unfortunately, we don't know if Augie Johnson is telling the truth, but it's interesting also that he said he was in the delivery room when Brandon was born, but he didn't mention nothing about he signed the birth certificate. I find that a little interesting. That goes a little under the radar, but he doesn't mention anything to that effect. So like I said, I'm getting stepdaddy vibes from Mr. Augie Johnson. And I would just like to say R.I.P. to Mr. Augie Johnson, because he eventually ended up passing away later that year on October the 10th, 2014. So R.I.P. to Mr. Augie Johnson. For her part, Miki Howard did an interview with Essence.com around that time. And it was in, like I said, about March 2014, March, April, spring of 2014, around in that time. She did an interview with Essence.com, and this really is the only time that Miki Howard has really addressed this issue somewhat. So, because she's refused to really address this issue, in a big way, and it's the only time she's really kind of addressed the issue. In the interview with Essence.com, I'm pretty sure you can still pick up excerpts of that interview. It's Essence.com interview. I think it's from 2014. You might see updated dates like 2020 or later dates, but the interview actually happened in 2014. So you probably can find this interview if you search for it. But anyway, Miki Howard in the interview discounted anything that Augie Johnson had to say in reference to him being the biological father of Brandon. She discounted everything. She basically said, don't believe anything that man says. Basically, that's what she said in the interview. She also said she's unable to speak clearly and transparently as the interviewer probably wanted her to speak, because she was under a non-disclosure agreement, or a NDA, with the Jacksons, I guess, with the Jackson family. But she did mention that the Jackson family was a good family. She praised the Jackson family in that interview. She also revealed that her two sons, Brandon and Nicholas, went every weekend to the Jacksons' house, spent the weekends at the Jacksons' family home. And also they visited Neverland later on too, in the late 80s when Michael got Neverland. But she said that her two sons, Brandon and Nicholas, went to the Jacksons' Havenhurst home every weekend. And they were basically treated as one of the Jackson kids. They were basically part of the family. And wow, the non-disclosure agreement, she said, that's basically something that's a thing. That's a common thing in Hollywood circles, because people interact with people. She tried to play that off as no big thing, really. But she didn't deny that Michael Jackson was the biological father. That was glaring in the interview with me. I don't think there's a non-disclosure agreement that can prevent you from saying, no, he's not the biological dad. But she never said that. She never said anything to that. The only thing she said was, she's not Billie Jean, whatever that means. Some vague, I'm not Billie Jean, I'll tell you that. Whatever that means, that's kind of vague. But she never denied that Michael Jackson was the biological dad of Brandon. Never. And she never mentioned I think the interviewer asked her, did she ever meet Michael Jackson? Did she meet him around that time, or when did she meet him? And she avoided all questions of that. She didn't answer that question as well. So she did not answer the question, did she even know him at the time or anything? So she was very kind of evasive in that interview. But like she said that Jacksons are good people. She laid good praise on the Jackson family in that interview. So, you can research that yourself and check out that interview. Essence.com. It was from 2014, even though they have updated type of versions of that 2014 interview. Like they'll say it's just updated 2020, but it was from 2014. Just keep that in mind. But I found that interview to be real interesting. Even though the headline on that interview, which I find kind of laughable, the headline of the interview is that Miki Howard denies that Michael Jackson is the biological father of her son. In the interview in itself, she never denied that. So the title of the interview is misleading. But I'll let you all come to your own conclusion on that one. But yeah, it left more questions than it answered. I'll just say that. But like I said, over the years, Miki Howard has denied and refused to address that issue at all. I found it interesting that in this Essence interview that I'm talking about from 2014, she said one day maybe I'll be able to tell y'all what it really is, what's really happening, or what it really is, or what is what. And I found that to be interesting as well. But yeah, it's something. So we'll never know, I guess. But from all accounts, we know that Miki Howard did meet Michael Jackson at some point. We just don't know if she met him in the early 1980s, to, where conception time was Brandon, where Brandon was likely conceived. We're unsure about that, but we know that she eventually did. Miki Howard and Michael Jackson did eventually meet, and they did eventually meet. As well as Brandon met. We know Brandon has met Michael Jackson, and his younger brother Nicholas has met Michael Jackson when he was alive. Like Miss Miki Howard said, her two sons, Brandon and Nicholas, visited the Jackson family home in Havenhurst every weekend. And they also later on visited Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. So they met Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson knew them and knew of them and knew them. So It is what it is. We probably never know the truth to this story. What's going on? We don't know. Could it be his biological son? Could Brandon be his biological son? We don't know. We probably never know. So it is what it is. Since that 2014, really, a few years after that, when that DNA test, the story that kind of died down, but I still find it intriguing. This story is real intriguing, and it's just real intriguing to me. So the kid probably actually could be Michael Jackson's biological son. So that's all I'm saying. But hey, I just wish all parties involved the best in this. Brandon even talked about in several interviews how he was well taken care of, whatever that means. So I don't know what that means. So, but yeah. And what I find interesting is that Brandon Howard still has a close relationship with several members of the Jackson family. He still has a good, solid relationship with several members of the Jackson family. So it's just interesting. It's an interesting story. Yeah, you just never know. It's never know what's going on here. So with that, I'm just gonna leave it right there. What are your opinions on all this? But please feel free to like, share, comment on this video. Also subscribe to this channel. After subscribing, please click on that little notification bell to be notified of any new uploads. And I thank you all the time for your support. I truly appreciate it. And on this video, I am out. Peace. One love.